one of the arguments for God that I think maybe is underutilized is what I would call the aesthetic argument, the argument from beauty. What are some of your thoughts about that argument? And I know you're interested in music. How does that point to God?
Yeah. Well, this came up for me personally just about a year and a half ago when I was listening to classical music and a song came on, and I found myself longing for heaven.
Wow.
This music just pulled up this longing in me for heaven. And I remember just thinking, well, why is that? Why does music do that for me? But then in general, music is such a powerful thing. And most people have their own experience of when music has moved them or touched them in a certain way. And oftentimes music conveys a sense of transcendence or significance. You know, you think of the way music adds to the experience of watching a movie. If the soundtrack is really good, and at the very end of the movie, the soundtrack is going, it really adds to the sense of significance of what is happening.
Sure.
So I just began to be interested in the philosophy of music. You know, from different standpoints, how do we account for its power?
I was watching a video about the Vatican museums and used the phraseology evangelism through beauty, which I thought was very intriguing. One of the questions I want to ask you about this is the question of kind of evolution. I mean, some people would say, for example, that we have creatures here on Earth who can appreciate beauty. There is a lot of beauty in the world in which we live. Does that tilt toward God and away from an atheistic point of view? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I've done just a little bit of research about how, from an evolutionary standpoint, people explain our love for music. And usually it boils down to what Stephen Jay Gould would call an evolutionary spandrel, so a spandrel is an architecture term. It basically just refers to a byproduct or a spin-off of a process, something that's not the intention, but it comes about as a byproduct.
Okay.
So most people think, you know, say pattern recognition, for example, is something that has survival value. So that comes into the evolutionary process, and then music, the love of music, is a sort of spin-off of that because there's patterns in music.
Okay.
And that's one example of how people have put forward an explanation. I look at those and I feel very unsatisfied if that's the sum total explanation. Perhaps that's a piece of the pie, but if everything boils down to that kind of explanation, then in a way our love of music is accidental. You know, it could be that we would have evolved differently and music would just be white noise to us.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have any more appreciation for it than silence or noise. And so that perspective that feels inauthentic to the actual experience of music. And I don't see that as a certain argument for God per se, but I find it suggestive, as I do art and rationality and other things that we experience as human beings, that I think theism gives you a better framework for understanding and for experiencing.